Hey guys, Charles here from iMeshh. This tutorial is going to show you the fundamentals for corona lighting within Blender. The main lighting tools that you can use are HDR environment lighting, directional sunlights, .ies lighting profiles, and emissive textures and area lamps. And we obviously can't forget the incredible light mix feature for while you're rendering. You're able to sort of switch on and off lighting, balance your lighting out. You can even mess around with the brightness of the lighting, the color your lights emit, everything like that. You can even dim them, brighten them. Really, really powerful tool, and that's shown at the end of the tutorial. Firstly, we're going to look at HDR Eyes, and these are basically full 360 panoramic views which you warp around your render. So you've probably seen on Facebook or YouTube the sort of pan 360 videos and pictures people are doing. It's essentially that, but around the outside. So for interior renders, it's amazing because you can sort of wrap a sort of image of a park or a garden around the entire 3D model. So if you're doing animations or walkthroughs, the views move with you rather than using a still image or something like that. So firstly, I would like to show you where I get my HDRIs from. It's a website called www.hdrihaven.com. It's an incredible resource for free, high-quality HDRIs, and when you get paid jobs using their HDRIs, I'd highly recommend you donate, so Siona can create more of the content for us all. I'm also using this site as it requires no sign-up, so let me find one that I like the look of. So along the top, if I select HDRIs, if we then go to Outdoor, all right, now on the left-hand side, for interior renders, I actually use overcast or sort of partly cloudy shots. So if I do overcast, these ones I prefer doing because they use white light, sort of that surrounds the entire scene. If you use a bright light, sunny day one, that often spreads light and almost gives the effect of like sunlight coming through windows. You don't really have much control of it then. So using an overcast or a cloudy HDRI is a lot better for interior renders. I'm going to use Tiergarten, probably pronounced incredibly wrong. And if I scroll down, we've got the downloads. So they come in a 1K, 2K, 4K, 8K, and 16K format. For speed of use, just today, I'm only going to use the 4K, but normally I do use the 16K. Now, remember where we saved this. So I'm saving it under this PC, data D drive, and then in a folder called iMeshh. So I'm going to give this a save. Now back in Blender, if we want to have a look at this environment, you can't just use a real-time rendering at the moment like you can in Cycles. So let's quickly set up a scene. So if I add a plane, and just add a material to that plane, and let's also add a monkey, scale that down, and also give that a material. Maybe we smooth it as well, smooth shading, and then just add a camera. Where am I being blind? Sorry, there it is. Ooh. Okay, so we've got our scene. So as a default, your corona rendering will be using something called constant color, which is just a plain white background. If you click on the world tab, you'll see constant color selected. And if I press F12, you can see it's now just doing it with the white plain background or whatever color I changed the environment to. You can see there's different environment options. So you've got things like physical sky, ray switch, use world nodes. I mean, I'll show you physical sky quickly. It's sort of like a gradient of color. So you can see it sort of gradients out. What I would like to show you now, though, is environment texture. This is what we need to use to sort of load in the HDR. So it's asking for a lat long, I guess that's to do with the latitude and longitude map. If I click on open, go to where you saved it, so it was in data D, iMeshh,
and then it's the Tiergarten 4K, accept. And now if I press F12, we should see the HDR. So it's appearing a bit bright. So if you go into post-processing, or just post at the top, select tone mapping, and then go on to highlight compression. I'm just going to change this to 5. Compresses the highlight so we can see everything a bit clearer. Brilliant. So to show you some of the other things in the HDR, so you've got intensity. That's the brightness. So obviously increase that value and it will be brighter. Lower that value, it'll be darker. You've got UV mode. So these settings here, you really don't need to change. The only one that will be benefit to you is the X, Y, and Z scale. So you can actually scale it out depending on where the camera is. So if I just do a bit of a flatter shot and scale it to be 222, so they all need to be the same value, and then press F12 again, you can see it's now stepped it further back. So if you're looking through your window and the trees or whatever it might be really close up and look at sort of unrealistic really, you can then mess around with the scale and make it smaller. So if I then go 333, it'll step all the trees and everything back even further. So this is a really useful tool because trying to do that in cycles is very difficult. I've not actually found a way of doing it yet, but I'm sure there is a way. I don't use cycles anymore, but feel free to tell me in the comments if you know an easy way of making it smaller in the screen. Next thing we've got is environment rotate. So that's, if you're not happy with it, we can spin it around. So if I put that at 45 degrees, as this is a 360 view, it basically is essentially pivoting it around and spinning it around in the background. Okay, so I'm going to change the environment rotate back to 0 and the scale back to 1. But we can use this HDR. Really like this one. So that's how simple it is. So use HDRI Haven, find the HDRs you like, and then you can just keep loading them into new scenes. But again, my tip, if you're doing interior renders, use an overcast or a cloudy HDR. Gives you a lot more flexibility with lighting and also produces, in my opinion, a much nicer looking image. The next thing we're going to look at is sunlights. All right, so you add it the same way as you normally would. You do Shift A, go to lamp, and then we've got sun. If I then drag this up, drag this across, and rotate it on the y-axis, just so it's directional. Under the world settings, you also need to make sure you've got Corona Sun ticked. So having all these different options, I'll go through them one by one in a second, but for now, let's just use the default one. I'm not sure why I'm repositioning this because the lighting will be exactly the same wherever I am, wherever it is even. So if I press F12, and let's also lower the highlight compression, you can see here we've got our nice sort of shadow, as if it's the sun is obviously beaming down on it. So this is great if you're trying to angle light through windows or through patio doors or anything like that. You can use the sun and lamp tool. So also you've obviously got these options here as well. So the ones we're going to look at first of all is Sun Multiplier. This is the brightness of the sun. So lower down, the less intense the sun is. Higher up, if I put that on full, and also just quickly render that again, you'll see even if I use highlight compression, I still can't get rid of the sort of glare. It's full beam shining down. So never. Oh well, I'm sure you might find a use for it, but I've never found a use for having that on full beam, let's call it. So again, if I lower this all the way back down to somewhere a lot lower, and then re-render it. So I'm just pressing F12 to render it. You can see now it's still got the shadow from the sun, but it's a lot fainter. It's a lot less defined, and we can see everything again because it's not sort of over brightening our shot. I know people moan that Corona doesn't have a real-time renderer at the moment in Blender, but it exports so quickly you don't really need one. If I do sun color multiplier and drag that just a bit further back up to roughly where it was before, I want to show you size multiplier. So if I lower this down to the lowest it can be, which is 0.1, and do a render, this is going to be our before. So this is the lowest setting, and it basically is how sharp the light is, so the shadows. So you can see here, it creates a really sharp shadow from the monkey. Yet if we follow the same process, but whack this up, I suggest we whack this to about 20, and press F12 again. Gonna go back into highlight compression. You can see here now, so where the object's closer to it, you've obviously got the clean cut shadow, still a bit blurred, but then as the shadow travels, as the light travels, it breaks up, and the shadow becomes obviously less blurred. So that's the size multiplier. I'll put that back down to 1 for now. So next you've got color mode. We don't need to change this, keep it on realistic texture. This obviously the most realistic one you want. Turbidity, that's an interesting one that they've got this added in for lighting, because turbidity is often used to measure sort of how clear a liquid is. So for example, low turbidity, say 1.7 as this is, would be perfectly clear, so clear water. Whereas if you got water from a pond, or if you got water from a puddle, something dirty water essentially, that's high turbidity. So where it comes to lighting, it's how clean the light is. So this turbidity scales from 1.7 to 10. 1.7 is nice clear light, and then 10 is sort of makes it a bit, the light have less power, I guess is the best way to think about it. So it doesn't refract off surfaces as harsh. It sort of doesn't cancel out shadows and make the contrast really high. You can mess around with it. I personally don't really use turbidity a lot. I normally just keep it on the default setting of 1.7 and just mess around with the size multiplier. But essentially, that's what that does. The next thing we're going to have a look at is emissive textures and creating sort of area lights or spot cone lights. And for this, I'm actually going to not use the monkey's head. I'm going to use one of the free downloads you can get from iMeshh. So on iMesh's site, there are literally tons of free 3D models that you can download, and one of them is this chair. Okay, so you can download. I've already downloaded it. I'll show you how quick the download is actually. So I'm just going to save this into the iMeshh folder. So we've got 15 seconds. Now, once you download the zip file from iMeshh, you will need to unzip it. So you can see here I've already downloaded some. We've got that clear plastic chair. You right click. I use 7-zip because it's free and brilliant. And then you just do extract here. It's the option I normally do. And then that'll appear with this folder, and it gives you the breakdown, all the model files and textures. So to load this into this scene, if I press Shift F1, go to where I've saved them to. So it was in the D drive, and I saved it under iMeshh. And then in there, I've got the clear plastic chair Corona. So it gives me two files, a Corona and cycle setup file. So I do Corona, select object, and iMeshh plastic chair. So Shift F1 allows us to append from other files. You can basically take elements from other files, whether it's a material or an object, and load it into your scene. So using these Corona setup models from iMeshh obviously saves a lot of time. So append from library, and that's pretty much put it exactly where we want it, which is coincidence. We'll just double check it and make sure that it works nicely. So if I press F12, yeah, lovely. So we've now got that chair that we can work with, and we're going to use this in the next scene, learning sort of emissive textures to sort of set it up with some area lamps and show you all of that. Great. So what we're going to do for area lamps is I'm actually going to extend the background here. Okay, and then I'm going to set the camera back just so we've got more in the scene. Just make the sort of scene a bit bigger. I'm a nightmare for setting up camera views. Right. I'll leave it like that. I won't keep messing around with it. Next thing, before we look at the emissive textures, I actually want to switch off the background HDR. So in here you've got intensity. Change that to 0. And that means if we were to press F12, that will just create basically a black scene because there is no light in there. So yeah, I don't even know why I've done that, but that's great. So what we're going to do is now create some area lamps or using the emissive texture. So I'm going to split my screen in half. I'm going to add a plane in. Make it smaller. I'm going to actually put it just behind the chair here, so something like that. This isn't for you to copy. I'm just doing this as an example. And I'm going to go to the node editor, and then with this plane, I'm just going to select new. And then if you do convert to Corona, we've then got a Corona output and a Corona material. It just saves you doing Shift A and adding them in manually, Corona output and Corona material. I just want to select Corona light material. So in the node screen, Shift A, Corona materials, light material. I'm gonna make that a bit bigger so we can see it. And I'm just going to plug this in to the output. And you can see when I do that, the preview turns black. And that's because we've got to basically set up some things. So working down this list quickly, we've got color temperature, which is obviously the color of the light emissive. So it's quite nice. It's actually got a Kelvin temperature, and you can see as we change that, the color of the light changes, which is great. You've then got loading in IES profiles. I'll show you this in a minute. Okay, but for now, just going to quickly run through this. Keep sharp. That's if you load in a profile, it sort of keeps the lighting very sharp. I never use that. It seems to really go wrong, so avoid using that. Rotating. I'm going to show you this in another tutorial because it's a bit more advanced. There's a technique I use, but it's basically if you are using a directional light like an IES profile or something like that, you can basically angle it. So instead of it coming straight down, you can put it at 45 degrees or something like that. Now you've got self-illuminated and two-sided. So what this means is every single item in Blender has a front and back face. So the back face is dark, the front face is light. Now the way Corona works, if I was to duplicate this and do Control-Shift-N, so the back face is here. The light from this one will go upwards and the light from this one will go downwards. So it goes from whatever the front face is going from. So if you have self-illumination or two-sided, it basically means it doesn't matter if it's a front or back face, it'll emit light from either way. I'll run through some examples of that. Self-illumination works horribly. I don't know why it's there. If you want that, just use two-sided. It really just makes the scene really noisy, so I wouldn't use that. And shadow capture illuminator, we're not going to use at all. You've then also got emissive color, so that's the color of the light. Directionality, that's how you can actually create your own sort of cone lights. I'll show you that in a minute. But for next, the one I wanted to use is multiplier. So if I just change that to 20, you can now see it's emitting light. And it's emitting whatever the color of light is. So if I was to lower the color temperature, you can see the color of light changes and so on. So just to demonstrate this as an example, if I now press F12, behind our chair, we should have one light shooting upwards and one light shooting downwards from those two sort of planes there. Okay, if I was to change the material to two-sided, just tick that box and press F12 again. You can see it doesn't matter which way the normals are, the faces are sort of pointing, it will just illuminate above and below it. So I'll close that down. So untick that. I'm also going to delete this particular one here and just focus on this plane. So this one is with the face pointing downwards, so the light comes out the bottom. Okay, we've obviously looked at the multiplier. That's the brightness. So if I was to make that 0 again, switches it off. 1, semi-bright. 2, 20, obviously a lot brighter. I'm going to show you how using light mix you can set up all your multipliers correctly, but that's not till the end of the video. Next thing we're going to have a look at though is the directionality. Okay, so I'm just going to lower the color temperature down now. Now at the moment, the way, actually let's make it quite colorful. The way light works is it acts as like it's an emissive texture. So light goes off in all directions. It's not very sort of angular. You can see from that plane, it's sort of completely 90 degrees flat lighting. Now, if you wanted to recreate a spotlight or something like that from Blender lamps or anything, or even just create nice sort of coned lighting, you can use that with directionality. Now, I've found it only works between 0 and 1, but it will allow you to go past 1, so you've got to be sort of careful with this. So 1 is it's like a tiny little dot, and 0 is it's the full material. So if I make that directionality 0.5, and now press F12, this will essentially give it like a cone light. Just going to lower down the highlight compression there, or increase it even, not lower it down. But you can see that gives then from that plane, it gives nice sort of angled light. And you can go even narrower. So if I made that say 0.7 and was to press F12 again, that'll make that sort of even narrower. So yeah, you can see there, we've got a very narrow cone of light shooting down like a beam coming from the ceiling. It's creating a lot of noise though, so maybe not the best to do that. Well, I'll change that back to 0. Because the thing we're going to have a look at next is actually to load in a lighting profile. Now, I've had people ask on my renders, I think I've got one on TeamViewer loaded, yeah, here, how I've got sort of directional light coming off the ceiling lights in my renders. Now, that's using something called an IES profile. You can download these. They're completely free. There's thousands for free. In fact, if I was just to type in IES profile, free IES, or something like that, there's some downloads here, and I mean these have like 58,000 free profiles. Wonder if I just go on images if they show an example. Okay, these are some lighting profile examples. So you can see it's either like a clean cone or sometimes it's split. There might be 2 or 3 cones of light. I mean this one here looks like a god ray. It's like 6 or 7 different cones of light on top of each other. And you can basically download these profiles and just load them in. Now Corona, the free one you would have downloaded, actually comes with some IES profiles built in. So for example, let's make that a bit smaller, put it a bit closer to the wall. If you select open next to the IES file and go to where you downloaded Corona, so mine's under data, Corona render, and this is where we've got all our plugins. But there is in here a LUT bundle. No, LUT, IES bundle. And in here we've got some ones we can choose without having to download any. So if I was to use downlight intense pure white LED and press F12, you can then see that loads in just a nice profile. But you can see the light gets caught, so it's almost like it's got an interesting bulb on it, and it's sort of a darker shadow in the middle. All the sort of unique lighting flares you add into a scene can really add realism. So they're really, really good to use. I much prefer using IES profiles than using the directionality feature, but it's good to know that you can do both. So I'm just going to close that down. They're obviously really good if you've got a ceiling. You could imagine if that was a circle and I actually modeled it properly. You might have sort of 3 or 4 of them around a scene. Maybe lower the intensity down. Might be a bit too bright there. Try again on 10. I'm just going to compress it already. I mean, that's quite weird. I wouldn't actually ever use this myself, but you can see it's quite a cool feature. I mean, I wouldn't use this lighting setup. It's a bit, I'm not sure what these sort of black holes are like. But I guess if it was just this section, sort of below a wall cabinet in a kitchen, actually that would look really nice. It's when it gets to the floor where it looks a bit crazy. Okay, so that's IES profiles. And the last thing on the list for the material lighting is opacity. Now this is something that's really, really useful. So if I was to just delete all these and just keep it with that one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower this down, scale it out, and make it like we're doing a plain lighting from within Blender default. So something like that, shining at the chair. Also, I'm going to add in a new light material, so I don't want the IES, so we can compare. So again, if I make that 20, we can add some color to it if we want as well. So it's currently in the view of the shot, but if I press F12, unlike area lamps within Blender cycles that are invisible, this you can very much still see. So that's why we've got the opacity feature. So if I was to close this and change the opacity from white to black and was to render it again, we can now see it gives us our render with the sort of area light coming in from that direction, but you can't see it in the camera viewport, which is obviously what you'd want, I hope. So the final thing to show you is light mix. So this is obviously just the fundamentals course. I'm going to make a whole tutorial series for interior lighting. But this one is amazing. I love this. So what I'm going to do is show you exactly sort of how I would do it. So I'm going to, first of all, delete this. I'm going to make a quick scene. So this isn't going to be anything special, so don't judge me on this. What was that? 2.4. 2.4 meters is good. Delete the scene. Also, this chair we can probably move over. Now I have actually got a little plugin I'm starting to write for ArchViz, which is basically a kitchen cabinet builder. So what I'm going to do is just use this now to quickly plot in some units. So I'm going to take that and actually move it by 1.2. Let's put some drawers in the middle. Snap them in. We can sort of spread the worktop across all of them if we want. Tool cabinet. So this isn't finished, but this is going to be great for just our demonstration. So it doesn't have the worktop overhang at the back. And then I also want to do some wall cabinets. So let's put that in. Shouldn't have built the room first. Should have built the cabinets first. But we can then see we've got that there. I'm going to put this room all the way back so I can get a nice view of the entire kitchen. Maybe change the camera focal length as well, just so we can fit everything in. I also make the pass point alpha 0 because it's so much better for actually seeing. Because sometimes you'll set up a view and be like, it doesn't look as good as it looked in the setup, and that's normally because that's on 50%. You can see other parts of the design, so it still looks nice. Change that to a 100% sort of black, and then no worries. So we've got our scene. First thing I'm going to do is change the environment texture back to 1. So I'm going to keep that on 1. I'm going to add a plinth light in. So select under the carcass the plinth. We can move that across, scale that out a bit. This is just very quick. This isn't actually how to do lighting properly, but it will still be effective. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to give this object a new material. I'm going to call this LED plinth or something like that. And we're going to put a light material in. Now what I'm going to do is just make the multiplier 1 and then scroll down on the right hand side here, and you've got just below the preview you've got use light mix. So if you tick that, we can give it a light mix group. So I'm going to call this plinth lighting. So that's the first one done. Now in these wall cabinets I'm going to select the bottom of the carcasses, inset them slightly. This isn't how you'd normally do cabinet lighting, by the way. It'd normally be stretched across in most cases. Just going to move this up and create a new material. Assign that. Again, use a light material. This material I'm just going to call wall lights. Multiplier of 1 and use light mix. I'm going to call this wall cabs. So that's the second lighting done for our light mix, and then finally we're going to use some nice ceiling lights. So I'm just going to show you very quickly how I'll add in rough ceiling lights. If I add in a circle, press tab to go to edit mode, scale it right down, press F to add a face. I would then scale it, inset it, extrude it, add the outside material, flip all the normals, add a second material. I need to update my del apparently. And then in here, select light material, the other way. Profile 1, select an IES. So we've got an IES bundle here. Spotlight. Oh, we used downlight last time, that didn't work. Actually use this one, spotlight. So we're going to use the spotlight, and again use light mix. We're going to call this ceiling. And it doesn't matter how many items you add in with the same thing. The IES profile will replicate from each face that's emitting that color. So we've got wall cabinet lighting, plinth lighting, ceiling lighting, and environment lighting. And that's our scene. So let's press F12. Okay, and now the reason I kept them on 1 is because they're going to work. Oh, if I kept the area light in, idiot. Is it hidden or something? Oh, that was it. Let's get rid of that. I think I deleted it without deleting the I deleted it in edit mode rather than deleting it in object mode. Guarantee that was it. Yeah, I thought so. Okay, wonderful. So we've got our scene. Looks very interesting. Hanging off the edge of a building, it looks like. So we're going to go to Light Mix now, which is the tab along the top right. And in here we've got Environment, Ceiling, Plinth Lighting, Wall Cabinets, and Rest, which is basically any unassigned items. Now, if you're using Corona 1.6, Rest is your environment. So if I was to hold down left click and scale that down, you can control the brightness of your environment while it's rendering. Put that back to 1. But if you're using Corona 3, because that now works sometimes with the material editor, that will actually work under environment. So at the moment, environment doesn't do anything with this light mix. So the way it works is you can untick and switch on every single different profile. You've then got an intensity scale. So this is why I set everything to 1, because they all come in as 1 on the light mix. So if I change the ceiling to 20 or 50, actually let's just lower the highlight compression down a bit to, well, increase it, sorry, to 5. You can see now I can mess around and it's creating that nice sort of cone effect lighting there. I can also change the color by clicking on this tab here. So I've got a full color spectrum, but there's also a Kelvin temperature. This is the only one you're going to do normally with lighting. So we can add like a warmer tinge to the lighting. Click OK. We then got the plinth lighting. So again, you can whack that right up. Now with plinth lighting, personally, I make it quite subtle. So I'd either have it on 5 or 10. Depends obviously how much plinth lighting you've got in there. And again, add a bit of warmth to it if you want. Makes it a bit more interesting than the generic white light. And again, same with cooled wall cabinets. you can really mess around and find the sort of right temperature for you. Sounds like we're running a bath. We can change the Kelvin temperature, and then obviously you've got the rest of the scene, the environment. You could lower that down if you wanted to create a more impact sort of scene and didn't want sort of the white light coming in. So that's the light mix. Now the reason I keep everything on one is because now if I want to apply this back in Blender, I've got the hex color here and the intensity I've used. So for my ceiling lights, I can change the multiplier to 50 and the emission color to that hex value. If I then select the wall cabinets, what were they? Wall cabinets are 15, and this is the hex value. So multiplier 15, emission color that, and then the plinth was 10, and that's the hex color. So 10, that's the hex color, and then the environment was 0.57. So in here we can change that to 0.57. Now we don't need to use light mix. If we were to cancel this render, you can sometimes click X to get rid of that. There we go, faster. And press F12 again. I'll still need to increase the highlight compression again to 5. But you can see it creates then a really nice balanced image with you being able to mess around with it. Now, the reason I changed it and just didn't keep it on light mix, within other CAD packages, the denoiser will work if you've used light mix. Whereas within Blender, that rule hasn't been set up yet. So if I was to click stop now, and it would start denoising the image for me. So you can see all this noise. 3, 2, 1. Maybe that countdown was a bit slow. What's going on? Apparently it has denoised it. Oh, I know what I've done. So if you want the denoiser to work properly, under your render settings, under the denoiser, denoise, it's only on full fireflies, change that to full. Go away, Dell updates. Change that to full, and again, if we press F12 now, I'll let that render for a minute and just swap back to my team viewer because we've got this scene running. So again, this has some very interesting setup. So I've got the sunlight on environment, ceiling light. So I've got the ceiling beam up there, so I can lower the intensity down or increase the intensity on that one. I've got inside lighting, so I add a bit of inside lighting just to gain a bit of interest. If I whack the color up loads, we can see that more. If I was to change the color as well, got some crazy disco room going on now. You've then got plinth lighting. I've then set up the ceiling lighting as well. So again, you can mess around and see what that would look like with a brighter ceiling. And then the rest is the environment. So if you wanted it nighttime outside, lower the environment or rest and environment. Then you've just got your indoor lighting. So if I untick it inside, we've now got a nighttime scene. It's such a powerful tool. If we go back to my main computer, we've got this here. So now if I click stop, this just to show you the denoising. So you got the denoising here. If we go into stats, you can actually see the countdown. Oh, it's done now. So that's denoised everything. And if we had it set up on light mix and went back to the beauty page, you get rid of all the light mix effects. So it's really powerful to just set up your light mix once. Then once you've done it, you know it's going to work really well. Now there are so many more features, all these tone mapping settings, saving Corona settings files or conf files, going through different render passes because you can set up things like ID passes, all of that. We're going to show that in another video. This is just to sort of go over the fundamentals of Corona lighting. Hope you've enjoyed it. And like I say, I'm going to do a much more in-depth one for lighting interior scenes later on. But for now, this is just to cover the fundamentals. If you've liked the video, please like and subscribe. And there's going to be many more to come, including an interior rendering series and ArchViz tutorial course.